Hi, we're here at Sterilization Standards Week at AAMI HQ in Arlington, Virginia. I'm here today with a pretty exciting guest right as we wrap up this week of sterilization. Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Jami McLaren. I'm a principal sterilization science with Boston Scientific. I'm based in Minnesota. And I am co-chair of AAMI TIR17, which I'm looking forward to talk about. So great to be here.
Great. Okay. So, yeah, we're talking about this new document or not a new document, right? This is going to be a revision of an older document. And it sounds like this revision is very important. It's only 3 years later. And that means to me that there's been some evolution in the space that document is touching on. So, but before we even go into that, let's step back a second and let's talk about the history of why TIR17 even exists. And for those who don't know, TIR is a technical information report. Is that right, Jamie?
Yep, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And yeah, so the title of TIR17 is Compatibility of Materials Subject to Sterilization. And I think it's a very important document. The intended audience is not necessarily the sterilization expert, but the R&D engineer who is designing and building medical devices, where they may not be familiar with sterilization or what happens to products in sterilization. Maybe they just think sterilization is how we achieve a particular sterility assurance level, but actually, a really important aspect of sterilization is how your device materials interact with that sterilization process. If you put your device through sterilization and you kill all of the microorganisms on there, but it melts your product, or maybe more subtly, it impacts the materials such that that product cannot deliver its intended function or its intended patient care, that's not acceptable either. And so the TIR17 contains a wealth of information for the product engineer about how materials act with particular sterilization modalities. It talks about, there's several modalities that are outlined, just a general overview in the TIR. There's also a lot of material in the TIR specific to certain materials. So general guidelines on compatibility there. There's also quite a bit of material on there related to aging and how those tests are set up in product development and how that relates to sterilization. So a lot of good stuff in there that, again, critical to the product design engineer. And I can maybe just talk a little bit about the history. I believe
Sure.
this is the fourth revision of this TIR. It was first conceived in the late 90s, I believe 1997. Was the first revision, and it started off as just relating to radiation compatibility. Actually started off as part of the Radiation Working Group here at AAMI, where they put together a lot of information specific to compatibility of materials with radiation, as well as the aging material that went in there. 2008 was the second revision, where several other sterilization modalities were added. And then 2017, which was actually when I became involved in that TIR, they added a lot of material specific to these sterilization modalities and kind of did a reorganization. So all of the material was presented in this consistent way. It made it much more readable, and it was very successful. And then when the TIR again came up for revision, I think it was a pretty easy decision to open this up again, mainly for the reason that technology, both in sterilization and medical devices related to materials, is always evolving.
Right.
And so for this particular revision, we added one additional sterilization modality, I believe, that's chlorine dioxide, and we're also kind of reconsidering some of the information that's been in there since the beginning. Is now more completely described in other documents, particularly the material related to aging. So we're kind of revising that, pulled some of that stuff out of there, and a lot of other really, I think, beneficial changes for the latest update here.
Your mention of aging in particular caught my attention because, like you said, it seems that's a renewed focus in this revision. And I personally not quite sure what you mean by aging. Are we talking about as the device ages, the nature of the material changes?
Yeah, so when you qualify a medical device, you have to demonstrate that that device meets its functionality throughout its entire shelf life. And so there are programs in place that are discussed in the TIR that basically allow you to simulate aging in an accelerated way. To basically validate that shelf life. So there's a lot of science that's behind that relating to temperature, humidity, time, and the impacts on materials. So that is what is kind of laid out in the TIR.
Oh, that's very cool. So what else is being kind of added to this revision that we want to explore more fully?
Yeah, so a couple things that I'm really excited about. So we have added a couple of new annexes. One of the things that is becoming more and more important for medical device manufacturers is you might need to consider either multiple sterilization modalities for a device, or if you've qualified a device in a single sterilization modality, for whatever reason, you might need to look at changing the modalities. Now, every time you change a sterilization modality, of course, you have to go through revalidation, and a big part of that is the product functionality. How do the materials interact with your new sterilization modality? And so in this new annex, we've actually added a lot of information and I think a couple of really good examples of how you would go about assessing the potential impact on materials if you were to change from one sterilization modality to another. The other change that I'm really excited about here, and this actually goes back to, we were talking a minute ago about, why did we open up this revision? And so one of the very first meetings, that we led as co-chair talking about this revision, we actually sent out it was a very informal survey to the working group, and we asked that they, send this out to their, companies, and just basically asking, how is this TIR being used? And by far, the biggest aspect of the TIR that people identified as being valuable was the material compatibility annexes at the end, where there's probably 50 pages or so of tables where each table has a long list of materials, different types, so metals, thermoplastics, polymers, things like that. And for each modality, there's a rating of basically 1 to 4. So qualitative in nature, but still useful. So like if you're picking out a product, you at least know you probably shouldn't choose a modality that has a 1 rating, for example.
So this is a very valuable reference sheet starting point for your engineers.
It is. And like I said, this is what the users identified as kind of the most valuable aspect of this TIR. And when we went through the first couple rounds of comments on the working drafts, we did get a couple comments that made it clear. Like for example, we get some comments from someone that say, well, in this modality, I think this material should be at 2 instead of a 4, or vice versa, right? And when we dig into, okay, what's the basis of these ratings? We found that it wasn't always consistent. And for whatever reason, some of these sterilization modalities are relatively new. So the only information that was out there might have come from the specific, manufacturer of that sterilizer. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, some of these modalities, radiation, like I said, has been around forever. There's volumes of, literature and experience with that. And how do we capture that? And
so you're trying to make this a little less objective, or a little more objective.
A little more, yeah, exactly, a little less objective. And I think basically, the phrase we've used in the working group meetings is consistent and substantiated. So if you have a material A that has a rating of 1 in sterilization modality A, if that also has a rating of 1 in modality B, that's going to mean about the same thing. And the challenge is you have a wide variety of materials and several now sterilization modalities. We recognize it's not going to be possible to capture every single instance of every material interaction with each modality. And of course, a lot of that can vary based on how the material is being used in the device, right? And so that is the kind of I'd say the big challenge that we are working through with this revision is, how do we come up with something that is, again, consistent and substantiated to the degree it can, recognizing that we're not going to be able to capture every situation for every material everywhere. And so I think we've made very good progress on that. I think this week at the standards meetings we have a good plan. So now the challenge becomes, and I think in the next 6 months here, the big focus of the revision on the TIR will be of these tables.
Okay, so that's the revision that we can look forward to.
Absolutely.
And it sounds like, though, you guys are a very forward-thinking group. You're thinking about, yes, these technologies change. Yes, the scientific understanding changes. What do you have your eye on moving forward? So 3 years down the line, is there going to be another revision? Do you expect that to happen?
I would say probably. And the reason is that medical device technology, sterilization technology, materials technology is constantly evolving. And I think there are even a few sterilization modalities that are emerging or that we have reached out to the providers in the past about including in the TIR, and for whatever reason they haven't wanted to participate at this point. Chlorine dioxide was an example of that for the previous revision, where they said, we wouldn't have time to support that now, but now, they have a very substantial portion of the TIR.
Great, so the data's coming in.
Exactly. And so, I think there's, for the additional sterilization modalities, if there's an opportunity to update the TIR, so the latest information on that, I think that's important. Similarly with materials. And one of the big criteria that we're trying to set up for these revised tables I was talking about a minute ago is we want, in order to have the highest rating for compatibility, we want to be able to point to some peer-reviewed, neutral literature. So not just something that's been provided by the sterilizer or a particular material manufacturer, for example, but something where a university or someone has gone out, done work to assess the compatibility of this material with this sterilization modality, and then been able to publish that somewhere. And so I think, and that there's other efforts, through AAMI and Kilmer, and even came up at the working group meeting this week about going out and actively working with universities or other institutions to create this data. And so by the time we get to the next revision in 3-4 years, hopefully we'd be able to add that much more data and really make the tables that much more reliable.
And is this something of a call to action that we want to engage with? Do you want folks watching this video might be like, well, I'm doing that research, or reach out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say if you are doing that research and you're interested, please do reach out to, and Amy can put has my contact information, and
we can put a link in the description.
Absolutely, and I think we're, like I said, currently working on different ways to present this. Even maybe something that could be updated in real time, that would eventually feed into the next revision of the TIR, and so hopefully folks will be hearing more and more about that in the coming months and years.
Well, that's exciting. Hey, thank you so much for talking to me today about this. This is a really good way to wrap up Sterilization Standards Week, at least for me personally, because it shows this other aspect of all these different kinds of professionals working on this really important corner of the healthcare industry. So, Jami, thanks again, and I'll see you around.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.